It was a hot, sticky summer night, and as Greg tossed and turned in frustration, he looked over at his digital clock to read 2:10 a.m. He sighed, knowing how exhausted he would be once that buzzer sounded at 6 a.m. sharp. Whether or not it was the cool breeze funneling through his window, or if Greg had simply found the ideal spot on his bed, he found his eyes feeling heavy, finally succumbing to his mind's desire to sleep. But suddenly, in his peripheral vision, he spotted a shadow moving from the corner of his room. Too scared to move, he kept his head still. His eyes were unblinking as he watched the shape navigate towards him. Closer and closer it came, and it was not until it was standing directly over him that he could tell it was a woman, grotesque and decayed. Her skin was moldy gray, and her eyes were bloodshot red. What was left of her hair was long and stringy and wet. Her arms were abnormally long, and they swayed steadily at her side as her gaze met Greg's. A smile then curled on her lips as she slowly moved her face closer to his. Greg was frozen in fear. He was paralyzed. His body shook fiercely as panic set in, and the voice inside his head was screaming at him to move, to do something. Greg's alarm went off, his eyes shooting open. His body reflexively pulled itself from the bed. It was 6 a.m. Greg spent the entire day going over the dream, or what felt like a real encounter. He had never been so scared before. He recalled the shakiness, and how his body completely locked itself up. But mostly, he remembered the wicked grin of the creepy woman who had visited him. She never quite brought her face close enough for him to get an idea of who she was, but the features that did stick out sent shivers down his back. Greg came home from work, exhausted. Not only did he barely scrape a few hours of sleep that past night, but work was grueling. He flopped down on his living room couch and looked up at the ceiling. He was so tired that he knew he could sleep right then and there if he so desired. And when he thought about the woman haunting his dreams at night once again, the prospect of having a long nap during the day sounded appealing. So he did. And when he opened his eyes sometime later, he felt that his nap had been a success. But the woman came regardless. She walked over to him from the kitchen, and this time Greg could see her plainly. She was tall, with a dirty brown dress that was many sizes too big. She waddled over to him, and just as before, he was frozen, unable to move, or even close his eyes. Seconds stretched into minutes as she came closer, until eventually she stood right over him. She smiled again, showing what few teeth remained. Greg managed to force the words "no" with great effort. She laughed, the high-pitched croak piercing his ears. But in a split second, Greg was able to free himself from the terror, pulling himself up with sheer force. The woman was gone. His heart was pounding like crazy, and he felt dizzy. He once again postulated who the woman was and what she wanted. But after a few minutes of clarity, Greg laughed off the dream. He thought it was silly that he was getting so worked up over it, and contended that they were just nightmares and nothing more. And as always, nightmares eventually go away. Greg stood up and walked over to the kitchen, thinking about what he was going to have for dinner, when he stepped in something wet. The water moistened his sock, and he stepped away from the mess, searching for the light. When he could clearly see what he had stepped in, Greg's heart stopped a beat. He had walked on a wet spot on his hardwood floor in the shape of a foot. He could clearly see the long, narrow outline, even the crooked, spaced-out toes. Greg moved his head slowly across the kitchen, following the trail of footsteps, one at a time, all the way to his living room where it stopped, 2 feet next to each other, right in front of the couch.